The forested regions of Kentucky can generate a number of alternative crops, and one of the tastiest may be a little light brown, white-fringed fungi, better known as shiitake mushrooms. The recipe for growing this nutty-flavored product include things such as drills, spore materials, wax, water, and patience. And making a profit on this alternative crop means finding a market before the first mushroom is plucked from the log. Sandy and George Deutsch were looking for ways to keep their family farm profitable as dairy production became less economically viable. They took the information that was being generated by Extension Forestry Specialist Deborah Hill and began to see the profit potential after a couple of years of work. Let's join Janet Titian as she talks with Dr. Hill and George Deutsch about the growing and marketing process. And then Janet and Sandy Deutsch pass along some recipes that highlight the versatility of this wonderful woods-grown product.
Deborah, what can you tell me about this spot in terms of its specifications for growing shiitakes? What about this beautiful old tree?
Well, actually, it's an ideal space for it, and you see that there are many, many stacks of logs around it. I don't know how many total number of logs there are, but there are hundreds of them here. But this is an old beech tree that's probably been here, I would guess, a century or more. And even though it is doing its job as a shade tree, it's kind of a good example because a lot of its branches, they're not straight, but they are in fact the right diameter that you would use, because if you're looking for 3 to 6 inch diameter logs for shiitake, this tree has a lot of them on it. However, as I say, it's doing its job as a shade tree because shiitake mushrooms prefer high shade, that is to say 85–95% shade, and this is just a wonderful tree. Now, not everybody has a 100-year-old tree with an enormous spreading crown that they can do this with, but I think this was an ideal solution for the Deutsches to do it this way in their what is called a laying yard for the mushrooms.
Let's look at these logs right up here. And can you tell me about how old these logs are and what would be the average lifespan of a log used to grow shiitakes?
Okay, the Deutsches started just a couple of years ago, so I would guess most of these logs are a year to a year and a half old. Now, the diameter, when you get up to 5 or 6 inches diameter, the productive lifetime of the log is multi-year. So that even with regular forcing, which is what they are doing for their management, they should be able to produce mushrooms for 2 to 3 years anyway. When they're on their own and just producing mushrooms when the moisture and the temperatures are the right amount, then this size log would probably produce for 4 to 5 years. But you're concentrating your production by forcing them. And so it's the same amount of material for the fungus to eat or to consume, and probably the same poundage of mushrooms, but you're getting in a shorter period of time.
Deborah, can you walk us through the basic steps of shiitake production on logs?
Yeah. Yep, it's pretty straightforward. You start with cutting logs. I prefer in the wintertime when they're dormant. Choose a size that works for you. Mine are all 40 inches long because that's the size I can lift, but people like them a little longer. I wouldn't go over 4 feet, and a little shorter, I wouldn't go under 3 feet. So, you know, sort of 3 feet to 4 feet long, 3 to 6 inches, 3 to 8 inches in diameter are your standard size. Any kind of hardwood, especially the ones that you want to get rid of. Live, healthy trees at the time they're cut, because this is not the way to clear the deadwood in your forest, definitely. And then they're inoculated. You can see there are holes in these logs. They've been drilled. So drilled and filled with something called spawn, which is actually it's the spores of the mushroom that have germinated and begun to grow. So you pack that into the drilled holes, seal it with wax so that the sites are sterile and the moisture stays in the site. Then they are, you should label them if you're going to go for more than 1 year. It helps to put a label on that tells what kind of wood it is, what kind of spawn you used, and the month and year that you inoculated. And then they're stacked like this for 6 to 12 months. If they're inoculated in the springtime, often they will flush by the fall. But from the research that I have seen, people really should not force them into production in that production cycle until they've been inoculated for a year. They may produce mushrooms, and that's fine. Enjoy them, but don't push them at that point. Let them go for the full year cycle and then push them. They are soaked. then stacked in a log cabin, which is 2 by 2 by 2 by 2, covered over with literally a plastic bag. And within 4 days, or 4 to 5 days, the mushrooms should begin to appear. And they usually are harvestable because they come out at different rates, and they come out small and enlarge very quickly. Usually it's a 3-day period that they are harvestable. And then those logs need to sit for 8 weeks before you can repeat the cycle with the same logs. So you take your whole component of logs and divide it by 9, and then you do a 9th every week, and then by the time you do log pile 9, log pile 1 is ready to go again. So that's the basics of the production cycle.
And during your first year, if you're just getting started, what's the procedure for looking at what you will do with your shiitake mushrooms when you harvest them?
Oh, well, as I say to many people, the 3 most important things about shiitake production are marketing, marketing, and marketing. This is a product that has a market. You can find it in the big supermarkets and some of the, what a colleague of mine calls the stuff marts that have groceries. But the bottom line is, it is not tobacco, it is not corn, it is not soybeans. It doesn't have a track that you plug into and bingo, you get paid for your product. Farmers markets are a great outlet for small volumes. I mean, you're not going to be able to do 100 pounds there. But say 5 to 20 pounds, you probably can do on a farmer's market situation. And your natural growing period is pretty much March to October. So it's a good chunk of the year that these things will come out for you. Natural food stores, anybody that deals with health foods or natural foods, and have fresh produce, they would be good buyers. I strongly recommend people go to local supermarkets, not the great big national chains, but the local guys, and see if they will use it. And a lot of restaurants, whether they're specialty restaurants like Oriental restaurants or your what are called the white tablecloth, fine quality restaurants, many of those chefs are delighted to have, again, a consistent supply of, say, 5 to 20 pounds per week. That may vary by season depending on what their business cycle is. I think we should look at pizza parlors, especially the high-end pizza parlors, especially for the mushrooms that may not be the best marketable ones. So you sort of have firsts and seconds, and your firsts go to your highest end, and your seconds go to like pizza parlors. And then there is also an option, if you really want to investigate it and get into it, of value added, so that you're never worrying about marketing your mushrooms fresh, but you're going to dry them and grind them up and put them in soup mixes or dip mixes or something like that. But that's a complicated procedure too, and I still think you have to go through FDA rules of doing those kinds of value added things. But definitely, if you've got a year to wait for those mushrooms, do your homework and call people, call restaurants, and see if you can set up your flow of where they're going to go when you get them. I do not want to hear from people who are saying, I've got 1,500 logs with mushrooms, what am I supposed to do with the mushrooms? Because by then it's way too late.
George Deutsch emphasized that there's a definite learning curve involved in growing shiitake mushrooms, and that they had to change their marketing strategy when their supplies didn't match their first client's specific needs.
George, I understand that you've been in the shiitake business for a couple of years now. Can you tell me some of the things that you've learned over those last 2 years?
Well, I learned a lot in the, before I go any further there, I would say that I would emphasize what Deborah Hill says, to start small, and because there's so many things to learn, and the stuff, the information off of the videos and the pamphlets and the books and all, it doesn't just jump out into you into a usable form, because everybody does things a little bit differently, and it's my routine answer now is to tell people to try 200 or 300 logs and get some information, get some background to build on, because I know with myself so much the shiitake mushroom production was so different from what I was doing that I really had no basis to back up on. And so as we started, so much information that I read, it you know, I thought I knew what it was talking about, but when in actuality, when I put it into practice, well, I didn't have a clue. And so until I put it into practice, I really didn't have a good understanding of what was happening.